Okay. So just as a reminder, this is just meant to be a really informal conversation, a way for your students, for students who are entering into biology and chemistry, just to get to know kind of your perspective on things and what they can be thinking about as they're coming into this new university or to this new subject matter.
Great.
So the first question I always like to ask, is what got you interested in biology? What got you interested in teaching?
Well, thinking way back, I went to JMU and I was a pre-physical therapy major.
Yeah.
So I took anatomy and physiology, human physiology. Anyway, there's no major that is physical therapy. So I was a biology major. And I kind of kept going through with that thought in my mind. I took anatomy, I took all the courses that I was required to take for that path, but also my bio major courses. And as I got into the upper level biology courses, there was a lot of putting things together, making things connect,
Okay.
and sort of reaching that sort of level of knowledge where you can ask the next questions, and that sort of thinking really started to appeal to me. So I took one of my required courses was ecology, and that's when that really started to happen, and then evolution, and so anyway, I just kind of started veering off into sort of a greater interest in biology. And then when I had to also take a physiology course. So I couldn't take animal physiology because I'd had human physiology. So I had to take plant physiology. And then I just really got hooked. So I ended up going into a graduate program for ecology with an emphasis in plants and physiology.
Wow.
And it just kind of went from there. But what ended up happening is I ended up having sort of two areas of expertise, one in sort of a human anatomy kind of area, and one in plants and physiology and basic biology. So I teach both now.
Awesome.
And I got into teaching. I mean, as a grad student, going through a master's and a PhD, I had to do research, and I really enjoyed research, but there are lots of different aspects of research. And I would always have a little bit of trouble with one aspect. But throughout my graduate program, I always had a TA-ship. And so I got to be involved in teaching a lot along the way. So that's just kind of where that passion and that direction kind of grew more in that direction than to pursue the tenure, heavy research, publication, grant acquisition type of route. So
yeah, I can relate to that, coming from being a postdoc myself and then transitioning more to being on the student success side. So I can definitely appreciate that style of growth.
Right. And I really like that aspect of interacting with students who you watch that growth happen and watch their sort of those moments of those of putting things together and then getting excited about it, and those are just some really great things to sort of feed that passion. So I just keep going in that direction.
Yeah, so going off of that, then what do you see from the students that you work with that do grow during the semester? What are the attributes or the skill sets that you've seen that really help them flourish in your classes?
Let's see. So I would say there are several things that help right away is not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to try the new things. I mean, it's hard to do new things, and it's hard to do them alone because you don't know anybody. Like, you can't ask if you don't have friends in the class to, hey, come with me to this review session, or, a tutoring session is usually one-on-one. So those can be some sort of challenges for the confidence. But I also tell students that learning is disruptive and uncomfortable. And sometimes having to put ourselves, just make ourselves just do it. Even if it's just like, this next 30 minutes, I'm going to make myself do this thing that I don't really feel great about, but I hear that it's potentially a good thing for me. Because you never know, it might like just suddenly click and you come out going, I am so glad I did that. So I think that students just need to kind of be brave and trust because we do have an idea of what's helpful. And when we offer those opportunities, even just, come and meet with me, do it, just grit down and do it. Be brave, because you never know.
Yeah. So, just looking back on myself as being a former college student, I'm sure you can relate to this, and a lot of our students relate to this. It's always hard to imagine, but before you've ever met a professor one-on-one, like what's a good enough reason to come in and see you in your office hours, or to come talk to you? Is it, I need to have a large question about the class, or I need to have a small question about the class, or can I just come in to get to know you? What do you like to see from students?
I just want them to try to make a connection. If they just want to come in and sit down and, you know, talk about, how do I come prepared? How do I take notes? I am also really amazed at the backgrounds that students have, and when they're brave enough to share some of those, just that connection is really, really important for me. It also kind of helps me think about what to bring into the class,
Mhm.
when we're giving examples, or we're, applying something. Because a lot of my, a lot of what I do is try to get students to learn beyond the terminology and what's in the textbooks, to actually apply it and to
Okay.
connect it with, just like I was saying, what drew me to biology was all the connections, not just sort of reading and reciting what was there, but relating it to something that means, something in your everyday life, because that's when it becomes part of your vocabulary. That's when it becomes part of your language and your fluency. And that's what I'm trying to help students develop, is this confidence in their fluency and in the subject matter.
Well, I love how you talk about this fluency, and the interesting thing I've seen at VCU, and I've being here for a couple of years, and I'm sure you've seen this, is we have such a diverse spectrum of students, right? We have our students where they're going to come to your class and just know what they're doing and crush it, and then we're going to have our students who it's going to take them time to get, I guess, going in your classes. What do you suggest for those students where they struggle that first test, or they struggle that first month? What do you recommend they do to, become fluent in your class, to kind of pick up where you'd like to see all of your students be?
Right. What I'd like what I'd like them to do in that first, sort of part of the semester, where you really get to see whether what you're doing is working, is to sort of take a moment to sit back and assess, okay, so how was I studying? How was I trying to learn this information? Given what I was asked to do, was I there? And to just sit, and that's where sitting down with me, going through the test, looking at the actual questions that they missed, and kind of trying, sometimes I can see what their thinking was, and I can sort of help explain, or ask them, can you see how this answer is a little, with it leads, the questions leading you towards this answer versus this answer, but also seeing what their thought process was, is a way to make sense of whatever the right answer was versus the wrong answer. So in those first few weeks, having a chance to sort of assess what did I do well, what do I need to approach in a different way, is a really critical moment, because at that, it's early enough where you can make those changes, but you've got to be confident enough to ask, and brave enough to try it. I find that students try to use sort of efficient ways to study, and I'm all about that, but sometimes those are shortcuts to the actual learning. So I really try to make students see the connections, or like, what am I trying to say? Assess what the high value activities are for their learning, for the time period they have.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So that could be drawing things out. That could be writing a little paragraph to explain a process. That could be turning to the cat in their room and explaining it to the cat. Like they're, that's again, getting back to that fluency. But I tell students, do not reread the textbook. Do not reread the textbook, because that's very passive. But when you're writing things out, you're drawing things out, you're sketching diagrams, that's getting your brain, different parts of your brain, to do different things. And the more the different parts of our brain are involved in understanding or analyzing a process, the more it's going to stick.
It's so refreshing because I've done a few of these coffee chats already, and one of the themes that have been very common with all of my faculty's suggestion is when you can teach someone else, you're going to do better in my class than if you just memorize the textbook.
Yeah.
Especially looking at these daunting 10, 15-pound textbooks when you pick them up, right? It's so refreshing to be like, don't just look at the words, think about how you would, reiterate them to make sense to yourself, to others.
Absolutely. The other interesting thing about textbooks is that students don't usually have textbooks very often in high school.
Yeah.
So it's a really novel experience to sit down with a textbook. So I do spend a little time teaching students how to look at a textbook. You don't read a textbook like a novel. You don't want to be surprised by the ending. You want to already know what's going to happen throughout.
Yeah.
So we talk about looking at, maybe reading the introduction, reading the headers of each of the sections, and spending the most time looking at the diagrams and the figures and trying to figure out what those things are talking about. I mean, spending time with those and then go back and read, the details, because now your brain is already primed for what's the text is going to talk about. It's not like this new language that you're sort of struggling with. You've already sort of halfway put it together. So reading a textbook is kind of a new thing in and of itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and you've kind of already alluded to this in terms of seeing you and tutors, but what are the specific resources that you really have seen at VCU that have helped students navigate your course in courses like this? Are there certain parts of, is it the CLC? Is it really the professor hours that you find to be most useful? Like, where do you find students in general have like the most success?
So in my, classes, the lectures are large lectures. So I teach biology 151, and there are almost, somewhere between 200 and 300 students.
Yeah.
Students can get really comfortable being anonymous, but that's where the danger is. So I have about 6 to 8 preceptors usually, which are undergraduate TAs, students who've had me usually before for that particular class, that help. So when we're in lecture, we sort of break out into groups and we do activities that either answering questions or solving problems or applying to a scenario, what we've just learned about. And preceptors will sort of wander, if we're in person, they'll wander around the room and chat with different groups and make sure they're kind of moving along in the process, or help redirect them. Or if we're online, we do it in breakout rooms through Zoom. So those preceptors have review sessions. And I find that's a really great way to break that big classroom into a smaller community.
Okay.
I will say that some students who are struggling more get a little bit intimidated in those some of those review sessions, because it can be like the really, the students who are already doing well that like to just kind of get together and talk about what they know and answer all the questions.
Yeah.
And so my goal is to really provide an opportunity for some of the students who are less confident, maybe need a little bit different kind of guidance, to have specific review sessions for them. So preceptor review sessions are a great opportunity to develop that smaller community, and to interact with kind of a peer. I would say the Campus Learning Center is also a good place. I don't think it's they have group tutoring sessions, and then like you can go with a friend for a tutoring session, or you can do one-on-one. And I don't know that they take advantage of the drop-in group or the other, maybe there's some data that shows that, but I don't hear students telling me that. But I feel like that's an untapped resource that could be just terrific.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, as being part of the CLC, I'm always interested in hearing what students in your specific section are saying and what's working for them. So, if we're hearing, hey, this section could really use more from CLC to see if it can help them, that's great information, both for us and for your future students.
Right.
Speaking of your preceptors, and this is kind of, I guess, getting to our students who are already planning out their 3-4 years here, right? What do you like to see from them in order to get something like a preceptorship or a letter of recommendation someday, or looking to do research? How can they form that relationship with you that really will enable you to be able to feel comfortable giving them more than just a solid grade for the semester?
talk to me, come up after class, ask your questions, students do that. They either come up to ask for clarification on something, or they see what we talked about applies to something they've experienced or a family member, and they come up and talk with me about it. They come and review their test with me. They want to see, what did I miss? How did I do on this essay? Because I usually have one essay question at the end of the exam that they have a choice to choose from. Um, just that's a time where I get to interact with students one-on-one. And usually those are the students that end up emailing me later and saying, hey, I'm applying to the summer research program at, Chicago or University of Maryland or whatever. And then they send me their resume and their personal statement. And then it's like I'm adding to this person that I only knew in this one context that I would never have even known in any context if they'd never come up and asked me a question,
Yeah.
So that just kind of grows, and then they get, interested in, say, an undergraduate research project through VCU to work with another faculty member. And I can say, yes, they ask, interesting questions. They're very curious. They have good work ethic. I have a lot of, I can add to how I know this person,
That's
So
great.
I would say interacting with your professors is probably the number one way to start that ball rolling, build that, that relationship from the ground up.
Sure. So then my last question, then, kind of building off of that, and you mentioned this a little earlier, that you teach an intro class with hundreds of students.
Right.
And I had the same experience as an undergrad myself, where you almost automatically become perceived to them as this very authority figure, right? Like, it's very daunting to talk with someone who's comfortable speaking to hundreds of people. How would you like your incoming students, or any student, to perceive you? How would you like them to think of you as they get ready to take a class with you, or as they get ready to talk with you for the first time?
Uh, I would like them to think of me as just another person, who's actually on their side. I have a daughter that just graduated from high school last year and just completed her first year in college, pandemic style. I have a second daughter who just graduated from high school. I feel like I am in this unique moment where I kind of have a window into what these particular students have been experiencing over the last 2 years. And so I get it. I am a listener. I have been astounded at how the challenges that students have had just in their regular lives. I see that my class is like this much of their lives, and that there's a lot more to them. And I want them to know that I get that, and that I am here to listen and here to support, and perhaps, provide resources, direct them to certain resources that might be helpful. But I can also just listen. I am a person, and I'm on their side. I want them to see that. I don't want them to be afraid.
That's
That's
great.
what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me for the Science Hub coffee chat today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I just didn't bring coffee.